Thank you so much for joining in on our live story listening seminar today, and I hope you enjoy. Please feel free to comment or join our group chat. We will be happy to answer any questions that come up while you're watching. Now for Dr. Mason's story listening delivery of The Ungrateful Son.
Can I start?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I am Beniko Mason, and today I am going to tell a story. The title is called The Ungrateful Son. You might have seen this video before, not exactly the same one, but you might have heard the same story before on another video. But today I am going to do this according to the pamphlet that we have prepared for you. The pamphlet is about how to use comprehension aiding supplementation, and it will be, I hope it will be helpful to you. Okay, I will start. The title of the story, today's story, is called The Ungrateful Son. Now, son is a man. There's a father, okay, there's a father, and then there is a little boy, okay, that will be father and son, yeah? Now, ungrateful son means grateful means thankful. When you want to thank people and you have this feeling for somebody that you want to say thank you, you have a thankful feeling, and this is grateful. Now, when you put on here, it means not, and so ungrateful means not grateful, not thankful, and so it is a story about ungrateful son. Okay. A long time ago, many years ago, in Germany, it was not in France, it was not in Italy, it was not in Spain, it was in Germany. It was in Germany, and it was in Europe. It was in the place called Europe, and the story comes from a country called Germany. Anyway, a long time ago in Germany, there was a young man. It's not a small boy, but a young man. So there was a young man. Now, he was a young man. Now, young could mean very young, like 18, 20, but I'm sure he was like 30 years old, okay? Maybe he was 30 years old. But anyway, married to a young woman. Here's a young woman, and she was married to a young woman, okay? And she was probably like 25 years old. But anyway, these people, this couple means two people. And so this couple lived in a house. They lived in a house. And one day means like one day in March, okay? We don't know when, but one day in March, one Friday in February type of thing. So young man and the young woman were sitting. This is a chair, and this is also a chair. And the young man and young woman were sitting at a table, and they were going to eat a chicken. They were going to eat a chicken, quack, 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 quack chicken. But this chicken was cooked chicken. It was cooked. It was not raw. It was a cooked chicken. Okay? It was not raw. It was a cooked chicken, and it was a roasted chicken. Roasted. It was not a fried chicken. It was not a baked chicken. It was a roasted chicken. You cook in an oven. Okay, so it was a roasted chicken. Now, the man and woman, they were very happy because the chicken smelled good. It smelled good. And so they took a fork and a knife and they were going to eat. Okay? They, the man and woman, they were going to eat that chicken. Oops. They were going to eat the chicken. They were about to. About to means the same thing. They were going to eat the chicken. They were about to eat the chicken. Now, when they were about to eat the chicken with the knife and fork, there was a window here, and the young man, he saw somebody was coming. Somebody was coming. He saw somebody was coming. Somebody was walking towards the house. The young man saw a man was coming. This was this young man's father. It was a father, and this father was an old man. He was an old man. He was an aged man. Okay? Old and aged, the same thing. Old. 97 years old. Old man. So he was an old man. He was an aged man. And he was coming to visit his son because the father really loved his son. And so he came to visit. Now, the old father came here and he knocked on the door. And then the son and his wife said, "Come in, father." And so the old man came in. I'm sorry, but before the old man came in, see, I wasn't looking at the prompter, so I forgot. So that's the problem. So you have to have on a prompter. Now they were sitting. The young man was watching the father coming. Okay, and then the young man said, "Uh-oh, my father's coming." Then his wife said, "Oh no, your father's coming." He said, "I don't want to give this roasted chicken. I don't want to give this roasted chicken to my father." He said, "I do not want to share the roasted chicken with my father." Share means to give part of it to somebody and eat it together. You share the chicken means you share the chicken. You eat the chicken together. Okay. For example, if you have a Hershey bar, candy bar, chocolate bar, and then you have only one, but you have two friends with you, and then you divide. Okay, you divide the candy bar into 3 pieces, and you give 1/3 to one friend. You give another 1/3 to another friend, and you take the 1/3, the last 1/3 to yourself, and then you eat together. You share the candy bar. That's a nice thing to do. Okay, but anyway, share. So, but the young man said, "I do not want to share the chicken with my father." And so she said, "Let's hide it." Hide. Hide means to put it somewhere so that nobody can see it. Okay? So they hid. They hid the chicken under the table. Then the old man came. Sorry about that. The old man came and he knocked on the door. And the man and the young woman said, "Come in." So the father came. The father came in and she said, "Hello, father." And he said, "Hello, father." And then the old man said, "Hello, children." And then the young man said, "Father, would you like a cup of tea?" And so the father said, "Oh, yes, I will love a cup of tea." So, a cup of tea. So, these young people, this young couple, gave this aged father, old man, a cup of tea. After the old man had this cup of tea, he said, "Thank you." He said, "Thank you." Are you guys okay? Can you watch? Okay. So he said, "Thank you." And then after he ate chicken, he left. Not chicken. He had the coffee or tea. He left. Now, right. Okay, so after the father left, a young man and young woman took the chicken out and put it on the table. Again, they put the chicken on the table. But when they put the chicken, when they put the dish on the table, the woman said, "What?" I will write the big faces so you can see. The young man said, "What?" And the young woman said, "What?" They were very, very surprised. They were very shocked because the chicken was not there. Chicken, it was no longer, it was a chicken, but it changed to a frog. It changed to a frog. It was a big frog. It was a giant frog. Big, large, big, not small. It was a big, giant frog. It was a toad. It was a giant toad. The man was very surprised. And then he said, "What is this? Where did the chicken go?" Then suddenly the toad jumped on his face. The toad jumped on his face. The woman said, "Oh no," she said. She wanted to take the toad away from his face. And so she wanted to take the toad from his face. But when she tried to take the toad from his face, the toad, he was angry. He was very, very angry, and he looked like he was going to jump on her face. She said, No, please don't jump on my face," she said. And then the toad stayed on his face, and then he did not move. The toad stayed on his face and did not move. So nobody means not nobody. Nobody means nobody could do it. No one. Nobody could touch the toad because the toad looked very, very angry. The toad looked very angry, and he looked like he was going to jump on the person's face if anybody wanted to take the toad from his face. So he had this toad on his face. Then the toad was hungry. The toad was hungry, so the toad began to eat his face. The toad began to eat his face, and the man said, "Oh, please do not eat my face." And so the man had to give him, this is toad's food. Oops. So the man had to give food to the toad. He had to give food. Okay, give food to the toad means feed. He had to feed the toad. Can you see? No. He had to feed the toad every day, because if he didn't, the toad would eat his face. So the woman did not like it, and so she said goodbye to her husband, and she left. And this man had to feed the toad every day. He must do it every day, but he had to do it every day. This is a story a long time ago. So he had to feed the toad every day, because if he didn't, the toad would start eating his face. Now, this man had the toad all his life until he died. Every day, all the time, the toad was on his face until he died. He had no peace. Peace. Peace means calm feeling, quiet feeling, happy feeling, quiet and calm. It's not like a war inside. But he had no peace. That means he had a war inside, The heart is fighting. So the man had no peace, no calm feelings, no quiet feeling. There was no silence, in his heart. And he was very, very unhappy. He was very sad because the toad was on his face. And so he suffered. He suffered all his life. Suffer means experience pain. Pain means you hit somebody and it hurts. Oh, it hurts. Pain. This is pain. Suffer means you feel pain. You experience pain. So he experienced pain. He suffered all his life until one day he died. Because this all happened, because he was an ungrateful son. Ungrateful means he did not give his chicken to his father. He gave only a cup of tea because he was so selfish. He did not want to share the food. He was so selfish. He was greedy. Greedy means you do not want to share anything with other people. And so he was so greedy, he was punished. Now, he punished means God in heaven said, "You're a bad man. You go, I'm going to punish you." When you get punished, you go to jail. Anyway, now, he was an ungrateful son. Ungrateful means he's not thankful. He was not a good man. He was not thankful. He did not show his gratitude. And so he was an ungrateful son, and therefore he had to suffer all his life, and he had this big giant toad on his face all his life. The end. The end.
Thank you, Dr. Mason, for sharing that story with us. We had only positive remarks. There weren't any questions. People were just really enjoying the story. One viewer did mention, I think her name is Lisa, that she wished she could draw as good as you. And so I don't know if you wanted to comment on that about, do you think that it requires an extensive amount of skill when it comes to drawing, story listening?
No. We have Ben made a short YouTube video on how to draw. I'm not very good at drawing. There are a lot more other teachers who can draw better. Ben can draw better, and Catherine can draw better. Lots of other people can draw better. But I have practiced, and so I like to do this too. Something like that. He said, and then I draw a picture like that. And she said, something like that. When we do this, students can understand he is saying this and she is saying that type of thing. And so this kind of thing is very helpful, I think. But you can practice. Lots of teachers have said, I can't draw. And then I said, learn, practice, I said. And so we can always learn how to draw. Right,
yeah,
Ben?
We can share in the comment section below the handout that you made about drawing for story listening, some simple steps that can make you a very effective story listening instructor. So thank you, Dr. Mason.
You're welcome.
Since we didn't have any questions, I'd like to notify our viewers, please subscribe to our channel and click the little bell so you can receive notifications for next week's upcoming story listening seminars. And now we're going to have Dr. Krashen come on and talk to us about, can't really call it a new hypothesis, he'll say. It contains some new and old, but it's called the optimal input hypothesis. Thank you, Dr. Krashen, for joining us and taking the time to share with us.
And I'd like to thank the makers of Starbucks coffee for making this possible. I got a big container, and it might last a few days. Today's topic is optimal input, and the concept of input you have heard about before. It is consistent with previous views, but goes beyond them. Optimal input, we think, is better than any other way of helping language acquisition. In fact, it's the only way of really doing it, more efficient, and it results in more pleasant language acquisition. Similar to other things we've said about input, it says that language acquisition comes from understanding. It comes from understanding what we hear and understanding what we read. The ability to speak, the ability to write, fluency, grammatical accuracy, all those things are the result of comprehensible input. So the profession has had a confusion with cause and effect, and we are here to clear it out. Basic evidence, lots of it. I'm going to give you just a little bit. Most important, you can acquire language without ever saying anything, without ever writing anything. You don't need output. And a major cause of anxiety is to force people to speak before they're ready to do so, before they've acquired it, before they've acquired what they need to acquire. The concept of optimal input, Beniko Mason says it's based on my previous work, but I've read it, and I think Beniko deserves most of the credit for it. I gave some of the germs for it, but now it's a real respectable hypothesis, I think. There are 4 characteristics for input to be optimal. Number 1, comprehensible, of course. Comprehensible does not mean that you have to understand every detail. Some methods do this. They make sure you've got the whole thing, every word, etc. No. There's always going to be some noise in the input. Don't worry about it. If you pretty much understand what's going on, that's what you need for acquisition. So comprehensible, number 1. Number 2, I got the idea for this originally from Leonard Newmark, a professor at San Diego, who turned out to be my distant cousin, but that's another story. We didn't know it. Anyway, Leonard, I call him Leonard, my cousin, he said, for language acquisition to happen, for people to get input that they understand, they have to pay attention to it. And the easiest way of making sure people pay attention is to make it interesting. We now think optimal input is not just interesting, it's very interesting. It's so interesting that at times you're not even aware that you're listening to or reading a second language. Notice when the input's really compelling and you're really absorbed in it, you won't even notice the little bits of noise, the little bits of unacquired grammar or subtle things about vocabulary. As long as you're getting the main point, you're acquiring. We also know from the research, more input produces more output. I forgot to say that before. Okay, that's two things. It has to be comprehensible. It has to be best is when it's compelling. Number 3, optimal input is rich. And this means, first of all, there's a lot of language going on that makes the story or the text interesting. It moves it along. It adds flavor to the story, adds interest to the text. And there has to be rich input in order for language to be understood. It provides support that makes language acquisition possible. And now I'm in the middle of hypothesis 3, rich. I get to state a really big one for a change. You don't have to worry about seeding the input, S-E-E-D-I-N-G. You don't have to worry about deliberately making sure things are there. You don't have to worry about deliberately providing I+1. People think when I came out with this I+1 thing, that it meant that you had to find out what the order of acquisition is, what they're ready for next, and make sure examples of this new item are there in the input. It's easier than that. Give people lots and lots of comprehensible, compelling input, rich input. I+1 is there. Isn't it wonderful the way nature has worked this out for us? Given very interesting input, rich input, you'll get the language you need. Number 4 relates to the third one too, abundant. We need a lot of input to make sure this happens. You need a lot of input to make sure I+1 is there. And we don't acquire all at once. When we see a new word in context or a grammatical item that we have not yet acquired or not yet completely acquired, you don't get it all at once. You get a little bit of it. Research from the University of Illinois, Richard Anderson and his colleagues have stated this remarkable hypothesis. When you see or hear a new item in context and you understand it, you get a little bit of it, maybe 5%, 10%, which means when we see it again and again, we gradually build up the meaning of the new word or the new grammatical item. An easy way of making sure that input is compelling, especially with reading, is people have some choice in what they're reading, that's for sure. Self-selected reading is the easiest way to make sure it's compelling, and we'll see how we get there. Dr. Mason has made sure to the best way possible that stories are compelling because she bases them on stories that, as she has expressed it, have stood the test of time. Grimm fairy tales, folk tales, things we know are fascinating to many, many people. A good way of doing it. Well, self-selected reading comes as the first stage is stories, and lots of them. And you just had an example of how this is done, story listening. This leads to the second stage, which is, of course, self-selected reading. We're not going to get all the way there in school. Dr. Mason has introduced a stage that I think is extremely helpful called guided self-selected reading. She makes the point when you begin a reading program and students are, at the high beginner level, they're ready to start reading. You can't just send them to the library and say, just find some books. First of all, they've probably never been to a library and selected books in another language, or at least the language you're working on. They don't know what's out there. They don't know what the authors are. So it's good that they have some suggestions based on who they are, what their interests are, and what the books are like. Also, it's not going to be entirely comprehensible. Authentic reading, that means reading written by native speakers for native speakers, will not be comprehensible. We like to help them along by introducing them to, people call it modified texts. We call it graded readers. The point is, you've got to have a lot of them, and they've got to be as interesting as possible. I remember my French class in high school, which was probably similar to the classes you took in secondary school. We had, each chapter had a reading passage, and it was usually designed, it was always designed to pump in all the new grammar, all the new vocabulary. So if you read the first one, that's okay. You got to the second and third, you were already confused because it was full of new vocabulary, new grammar. And then once you've read a few, not that many, you're pushed into authentic literature, essays, fiction, etc., which you're not ready for. What Dr. Mason has done is just the opposite. She's recommended massive amounts of reading, huge amounts of reading that is comprehensible, that can be read nearly effortlessly. I've been trying this. I wouldn't call this, hard evidence that it's right, but it's very good to try it yourself and get a feel for it. And in my case, I'm using a language that I'm intermediate in, low intermediate, not a language I'm already advanced in. And the languages I'm good at, I've had lots and lots of easy reading, and I think that has made a lot of difference. So I've taken Spanish. Spanish is, first of all, a lot of fun. It's a lot of Spanish speakers here in California, and they're very generous with speaking. It's great. And I've started to read graded readers. I've reached already, I can do authentic reading, but it's tough going. I'm reading graded readers. My goal is to follow Beniko Mason's advice and read several hundred of them. Her students, who are generally secondary students who had background in English, do easy reading for 2 years, maybe longer. Dr. Mason has recommended 200, 300 short books. That's what I'm doing. I've started this summer during my stay at home, which has been pretty good, actually. And I've gotten a bunch of graded readers, and I'm going through them, and I can tell I'm getting better. I'm not speaking Spanish to anybody. Who am I going to talk to at home? But I've been going to the market Friday mornings. And Friday mornings, I go there because at 7 o'clock, it's old people only, and that's nice. There aren't a lot of people around. And I made friends with one of the checkout guys, and I got him to speak Spanish with me. He's Mexican-American. His English is wonderful. But I told him, a lot of people don't want to do this. Once you get a little friendly, they do. I said, my goal is, mi meta es hablar español como ustedes. My goal is to speak Spanish as well as you do. And he says, I'm here to help you. And I've noticed since I've started this 3 months ago, he's talking to me faster. He's using more casual, idiomatic language. He's basing what he says on what he hears me say. And that's a good indication that I've gotten a little better and the reading has gotten better. I think this absolutely works. So the second stage is lots and lots of easy reading, guided self-selected reading. Dr. Mason asked her students to keep a log, what they've read, what the book was. So she has some idea of where they are and can make recommendations. That's a good idea. And in the classes she taught at the university, she developed a library of 5,000 graded readers. What a wonderful investment that is. And we're looking for ways of making these things much more affordable for people, make them low cost or even zero cost. I want to talk about the most popular rival to optimal input, the most frequently recommended method, and that's immersion, which is a real dangerous term. I read an article, it was published in 2003 in one of the foreign language journals, and in the article, it was a good design. They asked, this is an article published in a journal published by the Air Force and other military foreign language programs. Very interesting. They asked people, officers who are already bilingual, what they would do, what they would recommend to maintain proficiency in their language and improve in it, and what the Air Force could do to help them. Overwhelmingly, immersion, immersion, immersion. Send me to the country where the language is speaking. Surround me with people I can talk to. Well, immersion's a two-edged sword. Sometimes it works. I had very good immersion when I did German. Oh gosh, this was before your grandmother was born, 1962, when I was a music student in Vienna. And I took German classes at the university, but I got to be good friends with the other students. And the other students, this is before the time when English was the universal lingua franca. Then we spoke to each other in German. That was our common language. And we shared information. We gave each other guidance. So in effect, it was an early form of guided self-selected reading. One person would say, I found these really easy books. This is all going on in German. Try this, and he would bring a copy. Read Heinrich Bull. It's easy and it's interesting. So we would pass these things around. We had access to more German this way, and I think that was one of the reasons I improved so much that year. It wasn't the fact that we called it immersion, that I heard it all the time, is that I got this comprehensible, compelling, interesting early form of optimal input. Let me show you just a couple of studies. The first study is the Sawako study. That's the name of the student, one of Beniko's students in Japan. She was, call her a highly intermediate speaker of English. Her TOEIC score was well above 800, 830. She took a year off and did immersion that should satisfy everyone who thinks immersion is wonderful. She went to Canada. She lived with a family, an English-speaking family. She had meals with them. They talked all the time. They had conversation. Sounds good. She took an ESL class. After that, she took a class in English for native speakers in technology as used in business. So you would think this was pretty good. Pre and post test on the TOEIC. She only gained 5 points all year. She told Dr. Mason she did no pleasure reading. Big difference. Then she went back to the university after the year, took a class in story listening, guided self-selected reading. Her score went way up. She gained 85 points, went all the way up nearly to 900. So this classroom experience provided more optimal input than immersion did. A couple more, I won't take as long with them. I call this the subjunctive studies. Subjunctive studies, our colleagues in Utah, Jeff Stokes was the main guy on this. These people work with students studying universities in Utah, have very active foreign language programs because they're basically designed to help young people become missionaries for the Mormon religion. So and then they go off to a country and stay there for a year or two, et cetera, do their work. Well, Dr. Stokes gave these people, some had been in the country, some hadn't, so had studied a lot, some hadn't, very good spread of ages. She gave them an oral conversation. She didn't tell them it was an exam. She just said, this is a conversation. The conversation required the use of the subjunctive. Now, those of you who've studied Spanish, those of you who speak Spanish, those of you who teach Spanish, know the subjunctive is very complicated. It is rare for someone to learn it consciously from a class, be able to apply it, etc. Here's what she found on the basis of the interviews. By the way, she made sure her subjects didn't know that the subjunctive was the name of the game. She asked them, did you realize this was about subjunctive? If they said yes, she didn't even look at the data. We threw it out. Here's what we found. Who was better in the subjunctive after all this study, going to countries? Study did not predict the results. The amount of time you spent in a Spanish-speaking country didn't matter. The amount of schooling you had, the amount of study didn't matter. The amount of specific study of the subjunctive didn't matter. The only significant predictor, the amount of pleasure reading you did in Spanish. That's where you find the subjunctive, and it was interesting and comprehensible, self-selected. Rather startling evidence for the power of optimal input over immersion. One more. I like to give these nicknames. The one I just gave you is the subjunctive study. This one, I'd like to make T-shirts and little buttons. 0.6 per hour. 0.6/hour will be the nickname of this. This was a study conducted with students of Dr. Mason's in Japan. These at the university where she taught a class that was open to the community. People came all different ages. I got it here, age 21 to 78. They had finished her program, her one-year course, and several of them asked if she could help them a little longer, do some guided self-selected reading with them, some GSSR, help us find books, talk to us occasionally, etc. Fine. She said, I'll do it as long as you take pre-test and post-test of the TOEIC examination, a major examination given throughout Asia. I accuse some countries of having TOEIC fever. It's so popular. Anyway, TOEIC's not a bad test. Reading comprehension, listening comprehension sections, I think are pretty good. Here's what we found. The number of hours you spent reading correlated very highly with your gains on the TOEIC. The correlation for both of you who understand statistics, 0.94, nearly perfect. Okay, else counted. We gave them a questionnaire. Some of them did extra work in test preparation for the TOEIC. Some did extra vocabulary study. Some listened to the radio. It didn't matter. It was the amount of reading that they did. Amazing. We have a list of what they read. They didn't read the same thing. They read what I think is the most inviting literature possible for people acquiring a language. Young adult fiction, which is really fantastic. Some of us have gone through this. I remember Harry Potter basically changed my life. I found out how brilliant some of this fiction was. After that, I read Hunger Games, several other series, all really, really good literature. So most of them read a few of the classics. But there was some variation, and fiction was the primary choice, not 100%. Another result. Okay, the major result, they made great progress because they had optimal input, far better than going to a country. No comparison. Another thing, we looked at individual variation. There was very little. Pretty much everyone acquired at about half a point every hour, which means, in 2-3 years of heavy reading, 3 hours a day, 2 hours a day of reading you like, enjoyable reading, you can pretty well go just about all the way from the moderate levels all the way near to the very, very top. We also found very little individual variation. People proceeded at pretty much the same rate. My hypothesis from this, conjecture, call it, which means it needs further confirmation, but it's a very interesting hypothesis. We're all gifted language acquirers. Given optimal input, we all acquire rapidly, and we find it pleasant, and there's not that much difference. I got sensitive to this when I was in Hungary, and I met a woman named Lomkato, a famous polyglot. And when I told people I was hanging out with Lomkato, they all said, oh, she's different. She has a different brain. What's different about her brain? 2 left hemispheres? A different medulla oblongata? No, same brain as everyone else. She simply found the right input. She simply had a good time. That's my opinion of that. Well, that is the argument up until now. I have not given you all the evidence, but I will give you some homework. Consider a method that you've used, that you've experienced, and ask these questions. Is the input comprehensible? At least comprehensible enough? Is the input compelling? Is the input rich? Is there a lot there? Is there a lot of it? I also want to say that I've only given you part of the picture. I've given you the core. What I've said is optimal input is hypothesized to be the core, but optimal input is part of a general plan to give people optimal instruction. There's a little more to it than just input. Just to give you an idea, it's basically not just what we're doing, but what we're not doing. We're not forcing people to talk before they're ready. We're not correcting errors. We're not doing excessive comprehension checking where the teacher stops the class and makes somebody, translate a word, in which case you're nervous all the time you're going to be tested. The focus is on understanding because it's so interesting. You'll be riveted to the input much better than constant comprehension checking. Okay, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm now going to turn the microphone over to our special guest, Justin Bieber. Oh, no, that's a different show. I'm sorry, I get confused. Okay, back to you, Ben.
Thank you, Dr. Krashen. And at the end there, you addressed some of the questions that came up while you were presenting on what should we be explicitly teaching grammar? What do we do following the stories? Do we have extensive activities? And also some people were curious about the case studies of where immersion worked and where immersion didn't work. And so we're hoping that we can attach your website so that the viewers can investigate the case studies that you have reported.
Can I answer one or two of them right now?
Of course.
Okay. The issue of grammar and the issue of adding formal studies, what Dr. Mason's studies have found, which have been replicated, that some people, what they've done is they've told a story and then they'll do grammar exercises. Skill building, draw a line from the definition, fill in the blank, etc. What we have found is that it's not very efficient. When you add skill building activities, they'll do better on a vocabulary test, but at what price? At putting in a huge extra amount of time. If you look at the whole thing together, it's not as efficient. Story alone gives you more vocabulary gains per minute than stories plus skill building activities. So to rephrase that, rather than finish up the story and have exercises, tell another story. You get more language acquisition that way. Okay. That was one issue. See, my short-term memory is gone. I only had 2/3 of a cup of coffee. What was the other question, Ben?
The question came up as to people wanted to know where they could find these case studies that you've shared in the past about where immersion has worked and where it hasn't worked. What conditions?
Well, I've given you a few. I would recommend a paper written by Dr. Mason that has a number of them comparing immersion with basically what we now call optimal input. Cases of the sort I just gave you. A survey paper has much more detail on this, and I recommend Beniko Mason net or sdkrashen.com where all the papers are.
Great. So we can link those in the videos. So anybody watching that was interested in reading those case studies, we will attach those links to this video so that you can read them later time.
Okay.
And I think that provides a great segue into some of the topics for next week's seminar, where we will have Stephen Clark, who's a professor in Japan, come on to introduce his replication study of what you did with Dr. Mason in 2004 on is form-focused vocabulary instruction worthwhile? Stories alone versus stories plus, as I like to say. And so we'll have somebody come on and talk about that further next week. We didn't have a lot of questions to come up while you're talking. People were just like, wow, this is what he's saying is right. This reading works. Input that is comprehensible works. Going to a country and not understanding the language.
Suggestion, try it on yourself. Take a language that you want to get better at or that you don't know. Like get some easy books in Italian, some easy books in French if you don't know it, some easy books in Japanese. Wouldn't that be nice? And you'll get better really fast. The languages I've gotten good at are languages in which I've had this guided self-selected reading. The other languages I'm not very good in, like Mandarin, Hebrew, Amharic, Ethiopian, there's nothing to read. That is the problem. It's absolutely not your fault. We have to create these things and we have to test them out, try them out.
And that project that's currently going on with the Stories First Foundation is our graded readers that are coming up in new languages and with new stories all the time for people to check back. that was an additional question, was where can I find good graded readers? And I recommended the Extensive Reading Foundation's website, where they give you a list of every publisher that's out there creating graded readers, and they select what they consider to be the best every year. I don't know if you have a resource that you go to for finding graded readers for yourself.
I'll tell you this is the only way. What Ben has just told you about the story listening website is right now the only hope we have. Graded readers, some of them are wonderful that people have published and sold. I have really enjoyed reading several of them, but they're expensive. And nobody has any money these days, that's for sure. So the fact that the Stories First Foundation is doing this is our salvation. It's really the only path. So great, thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you so much for coming on tonight to share with us. It's always very insightful to hear you speak. So we're going to have our closing remarks because we've kind of addressed the Q&A. Dr. Mason, I don't know if you wanted to talk about, there was a viewer who came on. Her name was Karen, and she said, are you guys going to talk about the activities that teachers can do after a story listening lesson? And I didn't, you wanted to address that.
Of course I do. Okay. Am I on? Okay. Okay. Story listening, like Dr. Krashen said, it is based on the optimal input hypothesis. That means we do not give anything but input, optimal input. Therefore, in the classroom, all they do is listen to stories, or if we have time left, they read books. They read a book. We do not do any exercises. There is no worksheets. The reason why I really like this story listening is because it doesn't cost any money for students. There are no textbooks. All the teachers do is they go to the internet and download the copyright-free stories, folk tales and fairy tales, and then they use those stories as the teaching material. And so no cost for the students, no cost for the teachers if the teacher could use the internet at school. And so no exercises, no activities, no games, no plays, no role plays, no role plays. Did I say that? Yeah. Worksheets. That's story listening. Story listening is we just give optimal input. And when you do this, when you have the students listen to interesting stories all the time in the classroom, and then you have the students start reading books at home, you can expect, if the students read about 100 pages per week, and if the students read about 4,000 pages per year, you can expect that your students' the TOEIC score is going to go up very, very much. Okay?
Yes, I think that provides a perfect segue into our closing remarks about next week's session, because next week's session we're going to have two presenters come on to talk about evidence, research evidence that supports that stories contain a rich language, and that stories alone are sufficient, input alone is sufficient, and we don't need extra activities connected to rich, compelling stories that we tell in class. So next week, one viewer did ask, if we're starting with students with no language ability in the language that we're teaching, where do we start with our stories? So next week we will have a demonstration video provided by myself of a basic story that you can use for very early language level learners. And following that, we will have two presenters come on. Both are members of the Stories First Foundation. We have Claire Walters, who's helping with our video feed tonight, and Stephen Clark out of Nagoya, Japan. And so Claire is going to present a paper that was just published last month in May of 2020, comparing stories versus a French textbook. And do the stories contain infrequent words? Do we get more from reading stories, folktales, classic stories versus what we learn from a traditional textbook? And then that will be followed by Stephen Clark, who did a replication study of is form-focused vocabulary instruction worthwhile? And this was a study that was originally done by Dr. Krashen and Dr. Mason back in 2004. And he did this in March of 2009 when it was published. So both of these people will come on to talk about these things that you were addressing earlier. It's like, what should I do after? Should I be explicitly teaching grammar? Should I provide the students a vocabulary list? We'll have two people that are very experienced in story listening come on to address their research findings pertaining to these questions. So thank you so much for joining us tonight in this conversation and discussion, and for asking questions and joining our group chat. And be sure to get notifications for our channel so that you will be ready when we stream live next week at the same time. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hope you have a good day. And we will attach our presenters tonight were Dr. Mason, Dr. Krashen. We will attach their websites where you can find further information, and feel free to contact us at our storiesfirst.org website. Thank you. Goodbye.